$144, that's what the farm made in its first year. You've spent more than that filling up a diesel tank, maybe twice over depending what you drive. Here's the number nobody puts next to it. The empire sitting on that same land is now valued at over $30 million. The farm alone, $12.5 million. The brewery, $21.3 million in sales in a single year. A pub with 140 staff and a car park bigger than most supermarkets. A shop, an Amazon deal funding all of it. Built on land a man bought so he could shoot pheasants and didn't want to say so out loud. This is the story of the greatest accidental property deal in modern British history, and why everyone who looked at Diddley Squat Farm in 2008 and walked away should be kicking themselves right now. Most people think they already know this story. Celebrity buys farm. Celebrity is terrible at farming. Celebrity makes a show about being terrible at farming. Tidy, simple, completely misses the point. Because what Jeremy Clarkson actually did, without a plan, without a property consultant, without meaning to, was buy the single most valuable type of land in England at the single most undervalued moment in 20 years. And then he did something rarer still. He refused to quit on it, even when every signal told him he should. To understand why that matters, go back to 2008. Not the version of 2008 you half remember from the news. The actual feeling of it. Northern Rock had already fallen. Queues outside branches. People trying to get their own money out of their own bank. Then Lehman Brothers went in America, and it took half the world's confidence down with it in a single week. Anyone holding serious money in 2008 was doing one thing, trying to turn it into something real, something you could stand on, something a government couldn't print more of overnight, because that's exactly what governments were about to start doing. In 2009, a year after buying the farm, Clarkson wrote in a newspaper column that land beats any bank, because the taxman doesn't get it when you die. He was right on both counts. Land doesn't collapse the way a savings account can, and it sits outside your estate in a way cash never does. He also admitted further down that the real reason was pheasants, that he wanted somewhere to shoot them. That doesn't read as well in print as clever tax planning, so the tax planning is what led the story. So he leads with the tax angle, buys 1,000 acres of the Cotswolds during a financial crash for somewhere between $4.5 and $6 million, and gets no credit for any of it. Because the only number anyone remembers from this whole story is $144. 11 years pass, and Clarkson does almost nothing with it. A local farmer, Howard Pauling, keeps the crops going. Seed goes in, harvest comes out. The land ticks along the way farmland has ticked along in that part of Oxfordshire for generations. Mostly unnoticed, mostly unremarkable. Exactly the way land is supposed to behave when nobody's watching. Clarkson is busy shouting about cars on television. This is worth sitting with for a second, because it's the part people skip past to get to the funny bits. For 11 years, this was just a farm. A quiet, ordinary, faintly profitable-ish farm being run competently by someone who knew what he was doing, while its owner had almost nothing to do with it. If Howard had never retired, there's a good chance you'd never have heard of Diddley Squat at all. It would just be land, appreciating quietly, the way land does, with nobody filming it. Then in 2019, Howard retires, and Clarkson is standing in the middle of 1,000 Oxfordshire acres with genuinely no idea what happens next. He could hire it out, pay a management company to make the decisions and send him a check once a year, the way plenty of wealthy landowners do. Keep ignoring it. Instead, he decides to run it himself. Every single thing that follows, the shop, the show, the planning wars, the pub, the brewery, all 30 million pounds of it, comes from that one choice. And that choice wasn't a strategy. Nobody sat him down with a whiteboard and a 5-year plan. It was boredom and stubbornness in roughly equal parts from a man who didn't want to just write a check and walk away. Year 1 ends. The accountant delivers the number. Every cost, every mistake, every piece of new machinery, every bag of seed accounted for. Profit, 144. Clarkson looks like a man who's just been told his dog died. Caleb Cooper, who grew up on farms and has never once in his life been surprised by how badly farming pays, doesn't even blink. To Caleb, 144 isn't a disaster. It's Tuesday. It's the number that explains why every farming family he's ever known has a second job, a diversification scheme, or a spouse working in town to keep the lights on. He's watching Clarkson discover, in real time and on camera, something the entire British farming community has known forever and never managed to get anyone outside it to care about. At that point, a rational man sells. Land values had already climbed hard since 2008. He'd have banked the gain, walked away with clean hands, and gone back to being a man who talks about cars for a living. He opens a shop instead, and this is where it gets strange. Because the thing that turned a good investment into an extraordinary one wasn't a planning application or a clever land agent working an angle. It was a shed selling vegetables and a council determined to make his life miserable. West Oxfordshire District Council came after him almost immediately. Enforcement notices on the shop. Restrictions on what he could sell and how. The restaurant he built in the lambing barn got shut down entirely, with 6 weeks handed to him to rip it all out and restore the land to what it was before. The car park he needed to stop visitors' cars clogging up a country lane got refused, while the lane filled with cars anyway, because people kept coming whether there was somewhere to park or not. Every single one of those fights got filmed. Here's the property insight that almost nobody's written down clearly, because it's a bit less satisfying than council bad, farmer good. The same planning system fighting Clarkson at every turn is the exact reason Cotswold's land is worth what it's worth. You can't build on it. You can't industrialize it. No distribution center, no housing estate, no retail park springing up next to the farmhouse. The restrictions that were driving him mad in real time were the restrictions making 1,000 acres of that countryside scarce, protected and worth more every single year, simply because no more of it can ever be created. The council spent ratepayer money trying to stop Clarkson expanding, and in doing so, protected the value of literally everything he owned. They were doing him a financial favor they never once intended. He hated them for it. They'd have hated knowing it too. 2 series of television later, watched by millions of people who'd never normally sit through a documentary about arable farming, the farm wasn't just land anymore. It was a brand, and a brand welded onto irreplaceable English countryside doesn't show up on any property developer's spreadsheet. Because there's no formula for pricing, the nation is emotionally invested in this hillside. Quick one for the comments. Because I'm genuinely curious what people say. If you'd had a few £1,000,000 spare in 2008, watching banks fall over and the news telling you the entire system might be collapsing, would you have put that money into a farm? Or would you have done what almost everyone else did, and gone looking for somewhere that felt safer? Because here's the uncomfortable bit. Almost nobody chose the farm. That's exactly why this story exists at all. Add it all up, and the picture most people miss becomes obvious once you stop looking at each piece separately. The land, buildings, and infrastructure are worth an estimated $12.5 million now, up from around $5 million at purchase. On its own, over 16 years in a rising market, that's a solid but genuinely unremarkable return. Nothing to write a video about. Then you start stacking everything else on top of it. The Farmer's Dog Pub, less than £1 million spent acquiring and renovating it. It now employs over 140 people and needed a 360-space car park built in a neighboring field just to cope with demand. That pub only exists because the farm exists. People drive in from Manchester, from Birmingham, from Bristol on a Tuesday afternoon in November to sit in a pub in the middle of nowhere and eat a Sunday roast made entirely from British ingredients. Nobody's driving 3 hours for the gravy. They're driving 3 hours to feel, even for an hour, like they're connected to something honest. That's not a menu decision the pub made. That's the entire product. If you've ever gone out of your way, properly out of your way, extra petrol, extra time, for a place that just felt real in a way most things don't anymore, you already understand exactly why that pub works. That's not a Clarkson fan behavior. That's a normal human being tired of everything feeling manufactured. Then there's Hawkstone. Clarkson started brewing because he had barley the market wouldn't pay a fair price for. That's not a Clarkson problem specifically. It's the problem every British arable farmer runs into every single year. Growing genuinely good food and watching commodity buyers offer a price that barely covers the cost of growing it. His response was to add the value himself. Turn the barley into beer, name it after a local landmark, put his face on the marketing even when it's not technically on the label. Hawkstone did $21.3 million in sales for the year to March 2025, up from $7.8 million the year before. Fastest growing brewer in Britain. On shelves in Waitrose, Morrison's, Sainsbury's. Poured in over 2,000 pubs. None of that came from the land directly. All of it came from the story the land made possible. You genuinely cannot separate the two. Take away the farm, the show, the whole narrative, and it's just another regional beer competing for shelf space against 100 others exactly like it. Then, October 2024, Rachel Reeves stands up in Parliament and announces changes to agricultural property relief on inheritance tax. From April 2026, the full exemption only applies to the first £1 million of agricultural assets. Anything above that gets taxed at 20%. For a working family farm passed down through generations, land, not cash, land they can't just liquidate a slice of, That can mean selling fields just to cover a tax bill on land they never intended to sell at all. Clarkson gets on a coach labeled Diddly Squat, brings Caleb and Charlie with him, and drives to Westminster to join a protest somewhere between 10,000 and 40,000 farmers deep. A BBC journalist puts it to him live on air. Isn't he just there to protect his own tax position? Given that he once wrote in a newspaper column that avoiding inheritance tax was the critical reason he bought the farm in the first place? He fires back. The clip goes viral within hours. Half the country calls him a hypocrite, pointing straight back at his own words from 2009. The other half says the BBC journalist just proved his entire point for him, that the establishment doesn't take farming seriously enough to even ask a fair question about it. The government's position doesn't move, no U-turn. At this point, it genuinely looks like the entire financial architecture underneath the Diddly Squat empire is under threat. The tax advantage that made farmland attractive to people with capital, the rule that let land stay in families instead of forcing a sale every single generation, is being taken away. Property developers who've never planted a seed in their life start doing sums about what happens when large estates are forced to break up to cover tax bills. They start circling those estates like it's an opportunity. Here's what those property developers completely missed. The Amazon production crew was filming that entire protest for Series 5. The political fight threatening the value of Clarkson's land is, simultaneously, the content justifying the television deal that funds everything sitting on top of that land. Read that twice because it's the whole engine of this story. His problems are his product. His setbacks are his storylines. His enemies, without meaning to be, are his marketing department. The council that shut down his restaurant handed him Series 2. The government that came after his inheritance tax position handed him Series 5. Every single time the establishment takes a swing at Diddly Squat, more people end up caring about Diddly Squat. And the more people care, the more the brand is worth. And the more the brand is worth, the more the mud sitting underneath it is worth. You cannot build that deliberately. No developer has ever engineered controversy this well by accident. Because you can't buy this kind of authenticity, you can only stumble into it by being stubborn and honestly bad at something, on camera, for years, until enough of a country decides they're on your side. But here's the part that isn't resolved, and won't be for a while yet. The inheritance tax change arrives in April 2026. Clarkson has said publicly that he'll put the farm into a trust, survive 7 years, and it'll be fine. Tax lawyers have pointed out, politely but firmly, that it isn't quite as simple as it sounded on the steps of Parliament. Trust income rates are punishing. The agricultural side of the business barely breaks even on its own before you add a single pound of television income. And the television income only exists as long as Clarkson keeps farming, keeps failing entertainingly in front of a camera, and keeps producing exactly the kind of content Amazon is willing to write large checks for. If the show ends, the brand fades. If the brand fades, the pub becomes just a country pub with a slightly too large car park. If it's just a country pub, it can't justify 140 staff. And if that whole stack deflates, the farm goes back to being 12.5 million pounds of beautiful, unremarkable Cotswolds farmland. Still a genuinely good investment, just not a $30 million empire anymore. The whole thing only works while Clarkson keeps going. He's just turned 65, so here's the full picture, put together in one place for what might be the first time. A man buys 1,000 acres in 2008, in the middle of a financial crash for somewhere around $5 million, because he wants somewhere to shoot pheasants, and tells everyone it's really about tax. He ignores the land for 11 years while a local farmer quietly runs it. He takes it over himself, almost by accident, because that farmer retires and he doesn't want to just hand it to someone else. He makes 144 in year 1. He opens a shed anyway. The council fights him for years, and entirely without meaning to, turns him into the most famous farmer in Britain. That fame turns the shed into a multi-million-pound retail operation. The barley nobody would pay a fair price for becomes a brewery doing $21.3 million a year. The restaurant the council forced him to demolish becomes a pub employing 140 people. The government comes after his tax position, and instead of quietly absorbing it, he turns it into Series 5 of a television show watched by millions. The land he paid roughly $5 million for now sits underneath all of it. The foundation of something that no estate agent has a box on their valuation form to price properly. Over the last 20 years, UK agricultural land has risen 203% in value. Clarkson's land has risen by considerably more than that, because the story attached to the land is now worth more than the land itself. No property developer modeled that outcome. No land agent saw it coming when the sale went through in 2008. No spreadsheet anywhere had a formula built for it. He bought 1,000 acres to shoot pheasants. He ended up shooting at something far harder to hit. The idea that ordinary British land, worked by ordinary British people, still deserves attention, and that people will pay for a connection to it that feels real. The land made $144. The story of that land made $30 million. Same field, same mud. Completely different idea of what that field was actually for. So, genius or lucky? You can make the case either way, and both cases are genuinely defensible. Maybe Clarkson is the sharpest accidental investor in modern Britain, a man who understood what land actually meant, emotionally and financially, years before the rest of the market caught up, and the pheasant story was simply very good, very deliberate PR from the start. Or maybe he just got extraordinarily lucky and the exact same farm, bought by literally anyone else in 2008, would still be sitting there right now as a quietly appreciating asset that nobody outside Oxfordshire has ever heard of. Genius or lucky? Tell me which one you believe and why.